I think we have had to move from teacher to student, on environmental work and on outdoor experiences for a long time. We've been in a position of, you could say, authority, whether that's the right word, but at least, a voice that people looked to and listened to, when we wanted to talk about outdoor sport and great products and environmental work. But with regards to climate justice and social justice and anti-racism, we have really had to step into the seat of the student, and that it's humbling, but it's what's needed.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The concept of the Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system, which keeps everything we need replenished as long as we all respect it and use wisely. So an understanding of how this system works, along with deep cooperation between humans and all life, is essential to keep us thriving and the spaceship flying. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with humans involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness, and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, activists, writers, designers, adventurers, healers, entrepreneurs, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of a more beautiful, life-sustaining world in service to life, becoming crew on the Spaceship Earth. Hello, this is Dan. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. It means a lot to have you here. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Alex Weller, Marketing Director for Patagonia Europe. Now, apart from Patagonia being one of my favourite businesses on the planet, Alex is an exceptional human. He has a brilliant mind, a beautiful spirit, and is dedicated to doing as much as he can to help bring forth a new paradigm of regenerative business, of which there is no doubt that Patagonia is leading the pack. His work at Patagonia is at this dynamic cross-section of outdoor sports and adventure, the amazing product that supports those pursuits, environmental activism and climate action, and engaging in culture change to help us live more mindfully, peacefully, and with lower impacts on this beautiful planet we all call home. Now, with a new mission statement that says we are in business to save our home planet, this was a wide-ranging conversation which explores Alex's journey to Patagonia, how Patagonia approaches the multiple issues we are facing as a species, its ways of working, how it supports environmental activism and projects on the ground. We talk about its use of film combined with campaigning to shine a light on so many of these destructive systems that underpin global consumer culture and how to disrupt those systems for change. We explore our consumption addiction, what post-consumption and new forms of circular design might look like. And we also dig into the events of 2020 and how racism in particular, white privilege, and its intersections with climate and social justice are creating a wake up for everyone, Patagonia included. So let's cut to it. This is the Spaceship Earth, episode 45, with Alex Weller from Patagonia. Right then, Alex, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm all right. Whereabouts on the Spaceship Earth are you right now?
I'm in Amsterdam at home in my office, and the sun is shining outside, and I'm feeling pretty good. I had a little bike ride earlier.
Nice.
Just to clear the mind and get prepared for the chat. Yeah,
excellent. Well, I'm delighted to have you here, and we should just dive in. And I think, I guess with all these episodes, I'd love to just, before we get into the the meat of your work, it would be lovely just to hear a little bit about a bit of your backstory before we get into the your work with Patagonia, but just a bit of context on, I guess, your what got you to where you are now. A little bit of an insight. That would be a great place to start, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best.
Do your best.
A short, shaggy dog story.
Short, shaggy, lovely.
Well, I'm definitely one of those weird people who decided to pursue a career in marketing, like while I was still at college, and I can't even really remember why marketing, but I know for sure that there was something that piqued my interest about this. The sort of interaction between creativity and analytical thinking or whatever. But I also think that in the 90s, it was probably one of the most exciting industries that you could think about, because consumerism was was just firing. Yeah. And to be part of that thing seemed so incredibly exciting, and so that's what I chased down in the career.
When was it? So this would have been early to mid 90s. Was this?
Yeah, I graduated from university in 97, and I got my first job straight out of college for a little what used to be called a youth marketing agency. I don't think they have them anymore, but that was back in the days when people used to. How
do we reach the young people?
Yeah. And you used to do things like, branded postcards that were perforated so you could roll them up into roaches for splish. That was that was sort of like the idea, or like hire graffiti artists to do some kind of corporate graffiti work or something.
Yeah.
So, all that, and it was actually genuinely super exciting. The company was called Third Planet. There was about probably 4 or 5 of us in West London, and loads of video games work, and I think we did some work for Vans and stuff like that. And it was a fun and exciting kind of start to that journey, and sort of allowed me to live in this weird, slightly surreal bubble where I could pursue all the things that I was really into, like skateboarding and music. Yeah,
because you're like proper skater, right? That's something you've been doing much of your young years, right? Well, but at least at that time, yeah.
I definitely was. Yeah, I definitely was. I mean, my body gave up on skateboarding before my mind did. Let's put it that way. But yeah, for sure. That skateboarding was the thing that I discovered when I was a young kid, and it certainly defined how I thought about things and looked at the world for a really long time. And so for my career and my passions to sort of overlap and work with really exciting. At the time, Vans, for example, that I worked with in the very early noughties was really this kind of emergent brand in Europe. Not many people knew about it. So sort of being part of that kind of explosion of action sports culture at that time in Europe and in the UK was really fun. And it sort of, kind of led me down this path into video games marketing. I ended up working at Microsoft, for Microsoft in Reading,
right.
Running brand marketing for Xbox, which was, again, loads of fun. Quite weird working in a really large sort of matrixed organization, but it definitely schooled me on certain things. And then from there, I moved over to Nike. That's when I moved to Amsterdam 8 years ago. To work for Converse and run brand communications for Converse, where we did loads of really interesting work on enabling creative culture, supporting music and art, and skateboarding still, believe it or not. I was approaching my 40s at that point, and still
that's when it was in your head then, the skateboarding.
Yeah, it was definitely, it definitely was no longer active at that point. But I think at that kind of period of time, we're going back probably 8 years ago, a lot of the things that I was starting to process as a grown up with, married with kids, who had spent a lot of my life I think the 90s just created a breed of like ultra consumers, and I was definitely one of them. And I was, on the back end of that, processing and struggling with the the lifestyle that I was living and that most people were, and starting to kind of pick away at my sort of environmental understanding and sort of scratch below the surface and try and work things out. And
was that something you were sort of seeing, or was it something you were more feeling? I'm just really curious because I went on quite a similar journey, but I was so curious as to where that came from. That awareness.
Yeah. I mean, you know, part of it came from the fact that I was traveling a lot. I mean, really a lot. You know, I was on planes most of the time, and starting to get this sense that what I was, the sort of the entirety, the totality of what I was doing, which I loved, by the way. I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Exciting creative work, cool dynamic company, great, smart, creative people that I was working with, but moving around a lot, becoming increasingly aware in my subconscious, I think, that it was crazy, and the narrative around, personal environmental impact at that time was one that was just starting to emerge. I think the conversation around sort of systemic environmental change wasn't really happening, I don't think. I mean, Dan, tell me, but
no,
I think 8 years ago it wasn't really happening. That movement hadn't emerged yet. And so I think there was just lots of individuals sort of grappling with, man, I think I'm making lots of impact here, and how do I work that out? And
yeah.
I'd always been really interested in Patagonia from a distance, this sort of almost like sort of supernatural brand that was doing really, really radical things that I probably didn't fully understand, that also made wonderful, wonderful gear that I was already a fan of. And, somewhat fortuitously, the role of, to run marketing for Patagonia in Europe popped up, and I started having conversations with those guys. And in having those conversations with Ryan, who was the GM at that time in Europe, and trying to, really understand like what is this company all about and why does it exist? And the reality that, presented itself to me was that this was a company that, yes, it made clothes, but it existed to do something much bigger than that. It existed to bring a conversation into the mainstream that needed to be had around the sort of relentless consumption of planetary resources, and how business could play a part in changing how we frame that and changing how we think about that, and ultimately do business differently. And it was such an incredibly exciting prospect. And anyway, I didn't need much convincing.
Yeah,
maybe they needed some convincing that I was the right guy, but I didn't need much convincing to sort of make that move across. And it has been, I've been at Patagonia now for 6 years, and it has just been an incredibly powerful and transformative journey for me. It continues to be.
It's fascinating hearing you talk, because obviously I had a trajectory into the brand world, and from an agency perspective, and remember like when I first started exploring this kind of sustainability and brand tension and what the hell's that all about, when I was working with Nokia back 10, 12 years ago. But even at that point, it was all, like you said, Patagonia was always there as this kind of light of possibility, and it was, I remember for years, would always probably be the only company that anyone would ever mention in decks and in pitches, and it was always this thing. In my head, it was so strange, isn't it? It was this that there was only this one brand really that seemed either able, capable, or whatever it was.
Yeah, I think it was a corporate case study long before it was a big brand.
Right.
10 years ago, you're talking about 10 years ago, this is a company that was probably generating about $300 million a year annual revenue, right? I mean, small in the sense of global business, but at the same time was being discussed, at a board level, in agency, conversations. It was this kind of corporate case study that was, that would get pulled up. So if you worked in marketing, you knew about Patagonia, you'd seen it in decks, you see it in presentations, as the conversation of, the intersection with brands and business and environmental solutions started to, come to light more.
Yeah.
But I think 10 years ago, as I said, 10 years ago, it's a relatively small company. And I think broadly speaking, citizens, people at large, hadn't really connected with that story yet.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. I remember coming over to your Amsterdam HQ a couple of years ago, and walking into the reception, and there's this beautiful big statement on the wall: "We're in business to save our home planet," which is quite some mission. And I know obviously that was an evolving statement that had come out not so long ago. But can we just talk about that a little bit, just as where when that kind of landed into the business? It was sort of an evolution, but also because to some people that sounds, it's, in many ways it's sort of beautiful and bonkers and nuts, and you know what I mean, and inspiring, and all these things. Can you just tell us a bit about that, when it landed in, and how do you work with that as an organization?
Yeah, there was a mission statement that was, I think, finally put into words back in the 90s, when the company was really trying to sort of consolidate its environmental purpose and its reason for being, and make it explicit. And I think until that point, it had been somewhat implicit. And the old mission statement was: build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, and use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. As you can see, it's etched into my brain. And that was the mission statement that I inherited, that I started to work with 6 years ago when I started at Patagonia. And it was a really useful mission statement because you could break it up into these three parts. Build the best product. Yes, check, we're building great product. Cause no unnecessary harm. Are we doing everything that we can to mitigate the negative impact of our business on planet and people? Yes, we're doing the best that we can, and we're moving that forward at all times. And are we using this business as a platform to inspire others and, broadly speaking, move the conversation forward? Yes, check, right? And we could look at that every day and go, does this initiative check one or more of those boxes? Yes, it does. We're doing a great job. This is really good. And so it became this really comfortable sort of coat that we wore, and I think we're quite pleased with ourselves that we would live up to this mission statement every day. And then in December 2018, Yvon Chouinard, the founder of the company and owner, and still the owner, he's now in his 80s, so we've got an octogenarian boss, and he changed our mission statement overnight without any forewarning, and it was delivered to us without a rule book. And he said, here it is. We're in business to save our home planet. This is why we exist. Now you guys have to go and work out how we live up to that. And it was really fucking intimidating, because all of a sudden we've gone from this set of words that we were really good at using to this. It was like he threw a stone like all the way down the road. It was so far ahead of us, but that was its intent. It's quite clear now, looking back, that it was designed to be difficult, to be aspirational, and to challenge us all to be much more single-minded and to up our game and accelerate our focus on the most important stuff. And I will say to you that its effect was almost immediate in how it accelerated the boldness of our work, the focus of our work, and the intensity of the work that we do, certainly with regards to environmental action. Things like Patagonia Action Works, I don't think would have happened without the new mission statement. The president stole your land, I don't think would have happened without that mission statement. Gift of giving, youth climate strikes. I mean, the list goes on. There was a real turning of the dial on our work and on our boldness.
It's so interesting. And do you think folks were actually sort of, unconsciously really ready for that then, almost, because it sounds like you say, it's almost permission to step up.
I think so. There was definitely hesitancy at first. When people first saw those words, it was like, because I think we were used to a mission statement being a reflection of how we work rather than an aspiration. And I think that's the thing that people really, in the first instance, kind of struggled with. And you could definitely see other people, outside of the company sort of raising their eyebrows, like, this is at that point, less than $1 billion revenue outdoor clothing company in the grand scheme of things, a relatively sort of small speck on planet Earth, professing to be aiming to save our planet, and so there was some vulnerability came with that as well, because it's like, oh damn, like all eyes are upon us as well. But it was once we really leaned into it, it was empowering, absolutely, and liberating.
It's I want to again, because obviously Patagonia has been living and breathing this spirit since it started, and we can dig into that a bit. And obviously the issues that the world is experiencing are coming at us thicker and faster, and by the day in weeks at the moment. And I'd like to chat a little bit about the last year in a second, but it's the work of Patagonia is this kind of blend, isn't it? You have this this outdoor sports, this cross section that you're working with, environmental activism and change, and it's quite a blend. It's very unusual. I mean, for me, it's always excited me, and for me, it almost feels like intuitively, every business has, should be operating at that kind of blend, because it's just not enough anymore. You can't just be focused on your product anymore. You know what I mean? But how does that manifest itself in how you guys work? Because it is an unusual, in the world that we live in, it feels like that's where we all need to go. But it's not. You're not just there about product, but obviously you're building these great products. You're trying to help people connect with the outdoors and perform and all this great stuff. But at the same time, the activism is so front and center now for you guys. And what is that like? Can you give us a bit of an insight into what it's like working with that kind of blend?
I'll do my best. I mean, it is, you framed it really well, Dan. It's a really dynamic tapestry, and it's ever changing. And 2020, without a doubt, added many more ingredients to that. And working out what to focus on and when to focus on it is a constant live conversation within the company. The product that we build is the engine, right? It's the engine of the company. We are really proud that we make fantastic product, and we make it for really specific end use benefits. And we make it in the best possible way we know how, causing the least amount of harm that we know how. But we also try our hardest not to artificially accelerate demand for that product. And so the role of product marketing within how we think about engaging with customer communities and communities in general is quite discreet. It is really specific to communicating on the supply chain and communicating on the end use benefits of that product. The environmental work, it runs alongside. It's less of an engine room. If the product work is an engine room where we are more sort of systematically working on storytelling, the environmental work is much more nuanced, because it's built upon real world relationships, groups that we support on the ground, an understanding of the issues that we're focused on. And so there is a lot of that that's quite timely, that is about us recognizing an urgent need to support something and leaning in and supporting that, and using our brand voice to make a particular issue or campaign more likely to be successful. So, on that sort of intersection between product and brand, if you like, that's hopefully that gives you some sense, a small sense of how we think about it. But there's also a bunch of other stuff that's always going on. So our Warnware program, which is the platform, a circularity platform that talks about keeping your gear in use for longer, reducing the need for new product, re-commerce, so buying used before buying new, is one platform that's always on and always has a communication need. And Patagonia Action Works, which is our digital activism platform, which we launched about 18 months ago. And and that thing constantly needs nourishing and feeding and working with. And so, at any given moment, we've got live projects with ActionWorks, live projects with Warmware, environmental campaigns, multiple product campaigns, sport community storytelling. So there's a lot. And learning how to lean in and embrace that complexity and not try and force simplicity into that complexity is part of the trick. But it took me a long time to get my head around that, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating, I say, because you're sort of playing with the need for sort of planning and strategic focus and consistency in communications, but you have this very sort of live element to what you're working with. Is that obviously these issues are coming at us faster and faster, and the world is reeling at the moment from all forms of crises. And I remember particularly, it just comes to mind when I can't remember if it was the last one, but it was one of the big XR rebellions, Extinction Rebellion. Was it October? I can't remember when it was. Was it 2019? I don't remember, but I remember Patagonia.
The last physical one.
Was it that one? Yeah. I think, because I remember Patagonia was very, very. You were very active around that time with. And tell us a bit about, because there was some fascinating things going on. I remember, you wasn't there something in the company about willing to support any kind of legal fees of staff who wanted to put themselves on the front line, and tell us a bit about how something like that comes up, and how do you kind of make decisions as a company about these kind of things?
So supporting employee activism is something that we're really focused on, and we do that in a bunch of different ways. We have something called environmental internships. So our employees are able to spend up to 6 weeks of the working year currently working directly with environmental groups. And that enables the employee population to really engage in the issues that matter to them, and do it in quite a deep and substantive way. And quite a lot of us have taken on that opportunity. But then, there are other forms of activism that are more sort of resistance oriented, and so whether it be climate strikes or marching, which is more a more, let's say, obedient form of activism, permission-based activism where people are allowed to march, and we've done a lot of that. But with XR, so we've supported XR through our 1% for the Planet giving for a few years now, and quite a lot of our employees are XR rebels, and actively participate in the planning and working with various XR groups around the world, in the UK and here in NL. And for the last rebellion here in Amsterdam, we gave the XR guys space in our office to be their sort of media command center. So they were in the sort of weeks leading up to it, and during the rebellion, we're using our office space, which was cool to be able to do that. And then about 15 employees went to one of the main blockades in Amsterdam. And one of the things that we have in place, so we have different support mechanisms for that. We have employee-based affinity groups. So there are people who actually join a blockade and lock on. And there are others that will be nearby to support with food and water and whatever else.
Yeah.
And but we also have legal support, so bail fund, legal support for those who get arrested. So it enables people to do that, that important form of activism as well within the context of their work, which I don't know whether that's unique to Patagonia, but it's certainly something that we've enabled for a while.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, it's making me think again of and we've talked about this before in the past about this, this idea of activism, and and for many people, it brings up a sort of this kind of idea of resistance and rebelling, and obviously, I think we see activism as something that everyone is invited into, and actually it's just acting on something bigger than yourself, right? And there are many ways to participate in activism, and but it's interesting, isn't it, with even as you're speaking about this XRP, just the support for staff that would want to participate, and that I imagine does sort of not compute for many businesses. But then when we step back to saving our home planet, and obviously this understanding of, without ecology, there is no economy, there is no business. This sort of disconnect, I still think, that exists between commerce and, the reality that, commerce cannot exist without a healthy planet, a stable climate, all of these things, which feel like obviously have always been at the heart of Patagonia's understanding, but it feels like we must be approaching a tipping point of comprehension of that. I really hope so. But you guys have been, through the work. Obviously you support huge amounts of environmental activism projects on the ground. Through your funding processes, but also obviously through your campaigning work. And just speaking, I'd just like to sort of explore that, because there's many different issues that you're getting behind as a business, whether it's agriculture, soils, climate, waterways, land access. I mean, there's so many things which you're flagging up and really trying to sort of bring attention to. How do you make those kind of calls at the moment about the things that you go after? And obviously, these are, you're really investing, like the film. I'd like to talk about obviously some of these campaigns and the film work that you guys are doing, because that's become a big part, right, of the work you're doing. But can you just give us a bit of insight into that?
Yeah, I can, Dan. And there's something else that you touched on there that I'd love to chat about in a minute as well, if we get the time, which I think is about consumption in general, and the sort of the elephant in the room in business. And maybe we can get to that.
Yeah, we will.
Great.
Let's start on the campaigns and we'll get into it. What are we buying anyway? Anyway.
Yeah. So you're right. We do work on a lot of different topics. And part of the reason for that is that the foundation for our environmental work is our 1% for the Planet grant giving. So very quick 101 on that. We tax ourselves 1% of gross revenue every year, and that money goes into a fund, and that fund is distributed through a grant process, a grant application process. And it's designed to support small grassroots environmental groups, mainly small grassroots environmental groups globally. And we support over 1,000 groups globally. Here in Europe is around 160 groups that we support on a really broad range of issues. But all
they can be big and small, right, as well, like real range of projects that you support.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't generically support groups. We support projects that groups are working on. So we don't just, for example, fund Friends of the Earth generically.
Yeah.
We will support them on a specific campaign or project if if their grant is successful. Likewise for Protect Our Winters, or Service Against Sewage. There's a bunch that we support, of course, and so that granting process is the foundation for the network, if you like, our environmental network, and it's our real contact into the important work. And we have employees in each country in Europe, and here at our headquarters in Amsterdam, whose sole work is to support those groups, to work with them, to build our network and to build alliances. And we do that in a range of ways. We do it physically, or we did, and we will again soon, with big meetups, which are called Tools for Grassroots Activist events. So we'll get 70 or 80 environmental groups together, and we'll share ideas and share best practice and learnings and educate each other, and hopefully move the conversation forward and make us all, hopefully better at what we do.
Yeah.
And we have Patagonia Action Works, which is a platform that all of those groups get access to. And that means that they can digitally scale their efforts. So we use that platform to reach our customer communities and connect them directly with the groups that we support, and they can do a bunch of different things. But the other thing that it does, Dan, is enable us to see at close range all of the things that those groups are working on. And in that understanding, we identify some of the most critical, urgent things that we think we can and should support. And that, broadly speaking, is the process through which we start to kind of filter in on campaigns. And so we will have, we'll have. So
it's almost like a living kind of like pulse network for it to allow you to really understand what's going on and where the pressures really are right now.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a really specific example. We made a film and built a campaign around that film a few years ago called Blue Heart. And that film was focused on an issue in the Balkan Peninsula of Europe, specifically Albania, Bosnia, Serbia, and which is an area of sort of unparalleled wilderness, pristine wilderness in Europe, in continental Europe, and specifically the fluvial systems, the rivers, and they have incredible networks of free-flowing rivers from source to sea. And in the rest of Europe, everything is dammed and obstructed and interfered with, and the ecosystems around them are therefore damaged. But we have these incredible intact river ecosystems. But we had been working for quite some time with a network of groups in that region who had been fighting to prevent the sort of tsunami of dam construction in that region. And the sort of nefarious business practices that were driving that dam construction boom. And there was a moment in time where we realised that this issue, this risk, was intensifying really dramatically and really quickly. And so we decided to lean into it, and that's how the decision was made, if you like, to focus on Blue Heart as a big global brand campaign. So make a feature-length film and do all of the things that you would do to drive large-scale customer awareness and lead people towards action. And the other thing is, that's really important there is that, the action-based outcome that we want to achieve is this, the stopping of dam construction. We want projects to be cancelled. We want, ideally, the systems that underpin them to be able to be enabled in the first place to be dismantled, right? And in order to do that, you have to kind of work your way back to through the roots of the decision making. And what we worked out in that process is that there are large funding mechanisms for the majority of these projects that sit with big international banks, like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So we focused all of our energy and all of our campaigning energy on asking the EBRD to change its funding policy for hydropower projects in the Balkans. But that process, of course, takes a long time, and it takes a lot of very technical expertise. But fortunately, because we have those relationships with those groups and we've developed them for a long time, all of that expertise and knowledge is there. And so we're pulling that up and synthesizing it and turning it into powerful human storytelling that hopefully moves people to action. And in the case of Blue Heart, it absolutely did. Yeah.
And it's because I mean, the films are amazing on so many levels, but they are like investigative journalism as well, right? I mean, when you watch them, you know, you are uncovering, like, as you say, like you sometimes these, you know, we hear about these issues, you're obviously hearing them on the front lines from the sort of environmental activism perspective. But like you say, once you start following the traces and the pathways and opening doors, ultimately, you know, it you know, 90% of the time, you know, it leads to money, right, and power, and
I mean, really all of it. And I think you know, the intersection between political and commercial interest and environmental destruction is ever present in all of these issues, whether it be dam construction in the Balkan Peninsula of Europe, or open net fish farming in the fjords of Norway and Sweden. You know, this is the systems that enable this environmental damage, this environmental chaos to persist, are usually an intersection of business and government policy. And that's that's the space that you need to drive a wedge into and obstruct. And usually businesses and politics are quite sensitive to attention, and film at scale is a really powerful way to sort of poke that sensitivity and to generate a response.
I mean, it's making me think of, obviously there's, you know, because there's you guys are releasing you know, a prolific now really with this approach, but I'm watching Who Owns the Land, and just what that was digging up in terms of, again, the sort of, even just like, you know, the framing of environmentalists by Reagan in the 80s as these kind of like these people that were this huge threat to the future of prospering America. And, you know, it's mad when you see all this stuff, and you see how these things have landed and seeded, and then obviously how that whole the Bears Ears, and how that opened up, you know, with the Trump administration, and you know, and it's dark, isn't it? It's like when you get into this, I mean, it's not you're not making pretty. I mean, you're making beautiful films, but they're properly you're properly exploring some pretty dark stuff about humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there is a permanent and persistent effort by commercial interest to defraud the public of information. You know, that there is a reason why these incredibly important stories often remain hidden and untold. You know, when you first talk to people about, you know, the issues in relation to salmon farming, for example, and how it is very rapidly accelerating the extinction of Atlantic salmon. On the surface of it, that seems like a very specific, quite niche, esoteric topic, you know, and why does that matter enough to make a film about it? But of course, as a metaphor, it's incredibly powerful, because the only thing that is driving the extinction of one of the most incredible keystone species on the planet is the desire to deliver shareholder value back to, back to the board, back to the shareholders of those publicly owned companies that farm salmon, right? And that's a system. That's an economic system that has the financial interest of a relatively small group of individuals at its heart. But the outcome of that system is the destruction of a keystone species. And that's an incredibly powerful metaphor. And it's the same for public trust. I mean, yes, public trust talks about very specifically the public lands issue in the United States and the the sort of the pendulum swing of right-wing politics, sort of libertarian ideals of, allowing, unlimited free access of, for business to resources, and the more kind of liberal values of retaining public land for the benefit of the people. But really what is at the heart of all of that is this sort of nefarious connection between politics and business. And you see that play out everywhere, across the UK, across Europe, whether it's the destruction of the Bielowice forest in Poland currently, or the Hambach forest in Germany, which is, in the process of being ripped out to, expand the Garzweiler to lignite mine, open-faced lignite mine. This is real stuff that's happening under our noses all day, every day, everywhere on the planet. And what's driving it is business.
And it is mad, because it dawned on me. It's been something I've been thinking about a lot, for some time. But again, watching the public trust and looking at the relationship with the land, but again, all this what you're speaking to again. But it's this, you sort of start questioning why is this going on? Like trying to think in the human mind of but it's this. So it seems to be this again, this sort of very short term story that we still hold. We this extractivism kind of approach to the world, which we still seem many people in powerful positions seem either. Is it because you think to yourself you can't? Is it just you don't believe it, or what is it that continues that logic of extracting and destroying? Because for a short-term gain, because you start to think that story is coming apart. This sense of short-term growth and perpetual growth, and how might we shift to this longer-term view of our place? You watch that film and you look at I can't remember, is it the Quitch, the indigenous people in Alaska, but that feature. But there's something, again, you look at the lands around like the Bears Ears, and these, when you hear them talk about their ancestors and this sense of thousands of years of connection, and then you sort of switch to the sort of the senators trying to do the deals with all the different kind of oil and gas companies. And again, it's just this. It's such a shift in how we see the world, from this time perspective. And it makes me wonder again how we might, can we see a future where we're not having to make films about like the perils of extractive culture, right? Because we've actually shifted our consciousness. And so I don't know where I'm going with that. It's just making me think. But
well, Dan, I know how much you care about the power of story and the need to invent and inspire, societal level changes through storytelling, and not just sort of marketing storytelling, but creating new narratives that are more compelling than the incumbent narrative. And you and I both know that there are people who are not just telling those stories, but living those stories. And you look at Rob Hopkins, for example, and the idea that you can create self-sufficient, regenerative communities that can have, a really wonderful quality of life, but are engaging in consumption in a much more mindful way. The idea that you can engage with and participate in food and energy and service, skills and expertise at a community level. There's some really, really powerful ideas out there that are already working. I think the really difficult thing is to scale those things and to make them believable for really large numbers of people. And because it's not going to be until ideas like that start to mainstream. Ideas like renewable energy communities. The infrastructure is there, the technology is there to mainstream some of these brilliant ideas. But how do we get that done, and how do we get that done within the context of the resistance of corporate monopoly, and the huge lobbying power that puts, a lot of barriers in the way of the important change that we need.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
It's brilliant, and this, I guess that's this shift, isn't it, to the shift to possibility again, which is this dance, isn't it, between sort of holding the line on the destruction and imagining and bringing forth something more beautiful. And I think, can we talk about the new campaign you've got coming up, because that's sort of speaking more to this, I guess.
Yeah, I think, and you put it really nicely there, Dan. In this shift from, lifting up the rug and showing people what's underneath it, and that's a really important part of the work. Of identifying what's broken and why it's broken, and not just like that's a beautiful landscape, we need to save it. But there are systems in place that are actively trying to extract that and take it away, right? And that story needs to be told. And I think for us, for a long time, and I think it will still continue to be part of what we do, storytelling around those kind of issues. And I would say Blue Heart was one of those. It's like we need to shine a light on this topic, and we need people to know and to care, and we need to point people towards the weak underbelly of that system in order to, hopefully drive some needed change. Artificial, I think, was similar to that. I think public trust is similar to that. The campaign that we're working on at the moment, which is designed to draw attention to and hopefully drive participation in renewable energy communities. And renewable energy communities, in really simple terms, is the idea that people can get together, build energy infrastructure, own that energy infrastructure, invest in it, consume the electricity that they produce, sell the surplus electricity back to others, out to others, and use that profit to regenerate their community in any way that they see fit. And it's a really, really powerful movement that benefits, communities. It benefits the planet because we're talking about reducing carbon impact. But I think the most exciting thing that it does, or one of the exciting things that it does, is decouple communities from this sort of blind participation in the consumption of something, right? And in this case, electricity. The idea that I don't really have to think about it; it just comes to me, and I spend money, and I don't know where that money goes. Most of it goes to a huge energy conglomerate. A lot of the times, that money goes offshore. A lot of the money that you pay for electricity in the UK will go to EDF, and that goes off, to benefit shareholders of EDF somewhere else in the world. And so, this idea that you keep all of those resources, monetary, financial, human power, into one place. It's a really, really powerful and exciting movement. And for us, the opportunity to start storytelling about future solutions, things that people can participate in that are going to make a real difference if they can scale. And scaling RECs, scaling renewable energy communities, is something that we're really deeply committed to. And yeah, we've made a film, True to Form, which will launch in April, and April the 15th, in fact. And we've got a big campaign supporting that. So we're super excited to get that one out.
I mean, I think the community. I've done a little bit of a bit of exploration with community energy over the years, and this everything you've spoken to absolutely holds true. And for me, there's something though, which maybe is also tapped into this consumerist question as well. But there is something about when you become, and maybe it's consciousness, but when you become aware of the energy that you are creating, that you're generating, be it through solar on your roof, or ownership in a wind turbine, or whatever it might look like. But there's something about that awareness that shifts, that I see, the community energy groups that I've done some work with, or even just as someone who's got some solar on his roof here at home, it's like something shifts because you have that awareness. You see it, you see the meter humming when the sun's out, you kind of start to shift your own sort of behavior in terms of like when you use power, like even with the storage battery thing, obviously that's coming now, but it wasn't for a while. But you'd kind of like try and use your power in the day, and then at night just kind of like you're quite happy to sort of turn everything off, and you're more comfortable with darkness. And I don't know, there's a shift, there's a consciousness shift, I think. And I think because in this kind of modernization, this rapid kind of acceleration of consumerism and slickness and always on everything that we've all experienced, which probably started from the 90s where we started this conversation, but we've become so used to just pressing buttons, and everything we need is there. But in many ways it's that's what's almost become a kind of gluttonous, isn't it? This kind of like we sort of like we're consuming even like energy in this kind of way where it's kind of we're very wasteful with it. We have no real consciousness, like you say, where it comes from, where does the money go that I'm paying, and there's something I think about that community energy which is so exciting, which is this real connection with energy, like what it is, and it's everything, right? Because we can't really do much without it.
It's really it's really fascinating working through this project to be reminded that the human experience has through history been completely intertwined with the need for energy, whether from and all of that energy ultimately comes from the sun, but whether it's from farming food to setting fires to the first windmills that were generating power to grind grain. And it wasn't until relatively recently that this sort of agency over energy was handed over to essentially to corporations, right? Mm-hmm. And the relationship with it, much like the relationship with food, just gets completely broken. And the information that you need to understand that thing that you're engaging with and using, consuming, sort of lives somewhere else. And so to your point, Dan, to be an active participant in that, I think reframes that relationship again in a really positive way. And I think you can see it happening. And I think the idea is certainly becoming more popular that, understanding about your food and its provenance and how it's made and where it comes from, and understanding about your clothes and, where they're made and who's been involved in making them and, how it got to me and what it was wrapped in when it arrived. But energy is one of those topics where I think a lot of those same people who are deeply invested in other things that they know have an impact are still like okay with the idea of switching to a green energy tariff, which by the way is a good thing to do, but that is, that green energy tariff is still wrapped up in a system that prioritizes the benefit of large corporate stakeholders and extracts the financial resources from communities and uses it for profit. Whereas that, the idea that those financial resources can come back into the community and benefit that community is the most powerful idea about renewable energy communities. It's really cool stuff. It's really exciting. And in the UK, there's a lot of really, really good stuff happening.
And so, what are you hoping for with this work? What's the intention? You've got the film, you've got a campaign. What's the sort of the intention for this getting into this space, and what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, at a high level, raise awareness that it's a thing, that it exists, make the idea exciting, and hopefully intrigue a lot of people and get them involved.
Yeah.
At a more specific level, we want loads more people to join existing energy communities, ideally to invest in them, to invest their own money in expanding community energy infrastructure and become shareholders and stakeholders in renewable energy communities. And in the UK, and by the way, you can just be a customer of a renewable energy cooperative.
Yeah.
Right? You can choose to buy your electricity from that supply. In the UK, there is another dimension, and that dimension is that there is still some pretty archaic legislation that makes it really difficult for renewable energy cooperatives to set up. There's currently about 300 in the UK, 300 RECs, RECs, and which for the population of the UK isn't a huge impact.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stops energy cooperatives from setting up is that by law they're not allowed to sell energy back to the grid. So that one really powerful pillar of benefit, which is keeping the financial return in the community and using that to spend on whatever it is, a fleet of electric cars, upgrade your local park, invest in the school, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
You can't do it at the moment. But there is a bill in development called the Local Electricity Bill, which is a bunch of cross-parliamentary MPs supported by a non-profit called Power for People, who we support. They're one of the grantees that we support in the UK. And they're trying to get that legislation changed so that these groups will be able to sell their electricity back to others and therefore really kind of benefit from the real vision of what this thing is. So one of the things that people can do, and one of the things in the UK that we're really driving for, is for people to participate in that legislative process, get in touch with their MPs, make their local MP one of the MPs that support this bill. They need 400 MPs to get it over the line. They're at about 250 something at the moment. So I think when they get closer to that number, they'll put that legislation forward. So yeah, that's an exciting milestone for the UK that could really change the game. It's not a silver bullet, but I think it will really help change the game there.
And does that bill exist just again because of just lobbying and keeping sort of profits in certain places? And
yeah, so you used to be able to do it, right, to trade electricity back into the grid as a non-profit or as an individual, but you no longer can, and that right was taken away by I'm not sure which Conservative government, but it was one of the recent Conservative governments.
Oh, was that because I work with a green energy supplier and I have solar, and I think I've had it for quite a few years, and so I still think I get some kickback still. But that's changed. This is what you're talking about. That provision has been changed so that it's no longer possible. Is that right?
For a renewable energy community.
Okay, so it's a community-led company. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, so if you need to go to Power for People to their website, because these guys are the ones that are really at the front line, and I'm sure you've got show notes, Dan, so I'll send you all the links. And people can check out what they need to do. There's a really great guy called Steve Shaw who runs Power for People, and he's doing a brilliant job of getting this much needed policy over the line, which, like I say, will be part of changing things in the UK. It's not the silver bullet, but it's gonna make a difference.
It's fascinating. This it's just making, as I'm listening to you, this whole idea of this disconnect through consumerism, like this, you're talking about, the disconnect with our food systems, the disconnect with our energy, and when we put our, when we transact everything to somebody else, there's this sort of illusion of benefit, but actually, it's interesting if you think about it, not only are we sort of losing track with, what's the side effect of all these things that we contract out or we sign off to someone else, the food we're going to eat, the power we're going to have in our homes. But there's something interesting, I think, as well about, which sort of goes counter to the idea of convenience, which is actually we become, in many ways, I think, more dependent on these systems, because, things like, I wonder, like, if we can create, distributed, decentralized energy systems through community energy, if we can bring kind of local food sovereignty back and get mass local food systems running again, no one will have to work as much. It's like,
or go to the supermarket,
right? Do you know what I mean? You create more freedom. I mean, it's sort of countercultural in some ways, isn't it? Because you kind of think, convenience culture is not only is it sort of destroying everything, it's kind of like, in many ways, it's sort of it's tying our hands even more, really, to and I know that's hard, and it's easier to grasp maybe if you've got a bit more, privilege or independence, because of your life journey or whatever. But ultimately, even speaking to that, I think, for coming out of COVID and all these kind of things, it just feels like this kind of stuff is going to be so key to try and help people create, a more meaningful existence, as well as stopping the destruction.
On a societal level, 100%. And I think that's where, I think part of the challenge, and, decoupling some of these ideas from the politics, because a lot of the time, some of these ideas, which are really exciting and meaningful to, potentially meaningful to a really broad cross section of society, just get lumped into polarized politics. This is just a wacky liberal idea. But think of, a village, any village in the UK that, that values its social fabric, that values its pub and its post office. These ideas of shared resources and community sharing things and working together, are really powerful and relevant. And I think relevant to not just, liberally leaning, liberal, politically speaking, liberally minded people, but to everybody. And I think somehow we need to sort of frame these stories in a way that's not just sort of lumped into, sort of radical liberal thinking. And I do think sometimes we can fall foul of that, to be honest with you. I'm not saying, I don't think we Patagonia have that cracked, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But yeah, you're absolutely right, Dan. The benefits of these things, of some of these great ideas, are not just about slowing down environmental destruction and global heating. They're about shoring up social fabric.
I want to just something on, I guess, the last year and 2020, which was crazy on so many levels. But I'm just curious about, and obviously have witnessed Patagonia's responses as well to a lot of this, well, at least just as an outsider looking in. But and I think touching a little bit on the intersectional crises that we're obviously becoming more aware of now as a species. But when we talk about, these really, really clear links between environmental destruction, climate breakdown, racial injustice, social injustice, and these kind of intersectional crises, which we've often maybe viewed as being quite separate from each other, but we're as sort of culturally starting to, many have understood this, for a long, long time, but as a cultures, I think we're starting to understand now the interconnections between these issues. And, with obviously in the US last year and, with the resurgence of, the Black Lives Matter movement, and obviously here in the UK and I mean all over the world, but we're seeing a lot more connections being made between these different crises. How does Patagonia respond to that now? And thinking, I guess, about often climate has been over here and environment here, and racism over there. How's that been showing up for Patagonia? And can you share anything on that?
Yeah, I mean,
I know it's a big question.
it is, Dan, but it's a really important one. And I think if there is one topic that has dominated our thinking throughout 2020 and into 2021, it is social justice and climate justice, and understanding, to your point, the intersectionality of these movements. May 2020, the murder of George Floyd was a reckoning for everybody, and at a company level, it was a reckoning. At a personal level, for me and many others that I know, it was also a reckoning, because I think the idea that that systemic racism was so deeply embedded in our societies and in our working practices and in the outdoor experiences that we love, and even the physical outdoor spaces that we, that we love to visit. It was a deeply important and timely reckoning, right? And I think all that you can do in that moment is hopefully rise to it and realize that there is work to be done, a lot of work to be done. And so we have spent a lot of time this year really trying to understand what is at stake with the outdoors, with the an environment that is not necessarily a safe place for marginalized communities, and how can we be part of hopefully addressing that, right? But also within the environmental movement, understanding, of course, that climate justice, which is something that we a topic that we've been aware of and participating in for a long time. The focus on that has really incredibly increased. And of course, when you understand and realize that the negative environmental impacts are felt the hardest by by marginalized communities around the world.
Yeah.
And and of course around the world means everywhere. It means in the UK. It means everywhere. Then you have to understand what's at play, and you have to find your place within that work. And that's really really a lot of what we've been doing. But it's I think we have had to move from teacher to student, on environmental work and on outdoor experiences for a long time. We've been in a position of you could say authority, whether that's the right word, but at least a voice that people looked to and listened to.
Yeah.
When we wanted to talk about outdoor sport and great products and environmental work. But with regards to climate justice and social justice and anti-racism, we have really had to step into the seat of the student.
Yeah.
And that, it's humbling, but it's what's needed,
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's a question, there's a sort of in my sort of naive mind, I sort of look at what's unfolding, and my hope is that these different obviously they're all interconnected, right? That's what we understand, oppression of people and oppression of nature through a sort of global kind of economic system is what's led us to all these different issues. And now we're seeing their interconnections. But my hope is that we can join the dots between a lot of these issues. And as you say, obviously that's going to require, a humbleness and a desire to face into our own white privileges and all kinds of uncomfortable stuff that needs to be unpicked, and like you say, some unlearning that needs to go on. But my hope is that there is huge healing and potential in those in those connections and dots being joined. You know what I mean? And there is, because then maybe we could be onto something quite substantial in terms of sort of energy and a field of change, because we're understanding that actually we're really all talking about the same thing, or we're wanting this. We're not talking about. We're wanting a similar future, I think.
Yeah, I love the way that you put that, Dan, and when it comes to the topic of anti-racism, for example, I think a lot of us, and I don't want to talk for others, but I will talk for myself.
Yeah.
In that, for the idea that I had a set of values that I believed in, and incorporated into those values was that I'm not racist, right? And that I believe that racism is a destructive force. But in being challenged to learn more deeply the systemic nature of racist systems that oppress marginalized communities everywhere in every dimension has been, it's been a powerful journey.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think one that hopefully can inform better thinking on many, many levels. I really hope so.
Yeah.
I really hope so.
It is. I mean, I'll just throw another thought. It's a reflection that I've had exactly on my own exploration of this over the last few months. But I've been at a project here in Bath where I live called Dream Space, where we've been gathering people to share stories of their sort of very localized felt experiences of some of these big issues. We explored the kind of what it's like to be living in a climate and ecological emergency. What does that feel like as a person in this city? We explored a theme of racism and anti-racism in Bath. Again, what does it feel like to suffer racism in this place, in this locality? And then we looked at also the sort of inequalities that have been greatly exposed through the pandemic, and been working with this amazing girl here in Bath, Rukia Osman, who's been very sort of a key kind of organizer of BLM in Bath and at the universities, and we convened this amazing group, people of color, Black and people of color, based in Bath, and they shared some pretty deep, personal, challenging stuff, but what came through it, what you could feel, and they spoke to this, was just an exhaustion of having to constantly tell these stories,
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like where we got to is actually what we need to be doing was we needed to be running spaces for white people to explore white privilege, and again, not in a kind of like, we're all bad, because again, it's so institutionalized. It's something, it's so subtle almost in many ways that actually, there has to be an intention to sort of unpick it and explore it and unlearn it. And it was just, it was an interesting came out of the process was that, actually we need more spaces for those of us that aren't experiencing this to start speaking about it, but who are, because as one girl said it, unless the story and the culture changes, nothing will change for us, So how to keep these things alive, I think, is going to be the, and front of mind.
I think it is, Dan, but I think, using the outdoor industry as an example here, once you recognize and acknowledge that the outdoors itself is a systemically racist environment in which marginalized communities on the whole do not feel welcome and feel unsafe, there is an absolute obligation to do something about that. And when you've asked the questions and listened to the answers and you hear it time and time again, you of course have to do something about that. And so I to your point, it won't, I don't think it will go away. I mean, the door is open. Yes, it is incumbent upon all of us to keep our feet jammed in the door and keep that conversation open and create the necessary change that is required so that within the context of the outdoors, all people can benefit from the incredible value and experience of being in the outdoors, right? Not just a small section of society.
Yeah.
That is I think a hopeful and inspirational challenge that that some of us will try and rise to.
Yeah. No, I love that. I want to just, because we could probably go on for hours, mate, but I know,
it's Friday. It's 5 p.m.
Exactly. I know we talked about the consumerism piece and the elephant in the room, and I guess there's a few strands that are sort of clear to me, and maybe you could just speak to a bit of this. But I guess there's a few things. There's there's your push on warm wear, which I know you mentioned, but that's something I think you started in 2017. It feels like it's becoming it feels like it's a bigger piece of your future. So I'd like to, anything you can just share a bit more on where that's going. But it's also just chimes me. I remember Yvonne Chouinard saying this thing, there's no such thing as sustainability. You know what I mean? Like every time you make anything and sell anything, you're creating an impact. So the idea that you can just be, it doesn't exist. So this whole idea of product and of course then there's the sort of classic, I can't remember what it was, but there was that amazing bit of Patagonia comms, those ads you ran where it was like, please don't buy this. Please don't buy this jacket, or I can't remember what it was, but it was basically telling us not to buy stuff. But where's this all heading? This kind of like, and I've noticed as well, just even just on how your quite a lot of your stores and communities are. They're often kind of, talking about, running kind of films on helping people kind of, fix kit, also making new kit out of old kit. And it's a real big push, which is, again, in a sort of world of, back to where we started, a world of sort of consumerism and stuff. It's sort of countercultural, but it's fascinating. And so what can you tell us a little bit about all of that?
Worn wear, the spirit of worn wear has been there for quite a long time in the company. This idea of, repairing busted gear and keeping stuff going for longer is something we've been doing for ages, and it actually started out life as a storytelling platform called The Stories We Wear. And it was just designed to remind people that some of the most radical and cool experiences that you've had in your life have happened in your most treasured garments, and cherishing that, keeping those garments going. So there was this, the first intent was this sort of emotional connection with the idea of product longevity. What that ultimately turned into was a big global repair platform that tours people going out, showing people how to repair their own gear, creating learning and education tools online so people could watch a short video on how to fix a busted zipper or whatever. These are all relatively small things. At the heart of all that, though, was the desire to change people's relationship with stuff and to think about what they already own before they think about buying something new. And that intention was genuine. What that has evolved to is a more sort of holistic cross-business vision for second life product, end of life product, recycling, upcycling, re-commerce, and being able to ultimately give our customers the choice to buy both either new or used Patagonia gear from us in the same space online is where we're heading to. That's what we want the ultimate outcome to be. It's quite difficult to do, by the way, in a sort of practical operational sense, but that's where we're headed. But of course, that's only really sort of part of the equation, and it is very practical. It is also quite metaphorical for, let's say, deconsumption. But I think until we really get to the root of how we can not only get to a sort of resource neutral status as a business, but a regenerative status, so that hopefully we are putting more back in than we're taking out. That's a long road ahead, and it's going to be challenging. And I think one of those big questions, and one that we are grappling with as a company, is growth. Is just the idea that year after year we will sell more things, versus the idea that we could be at a size of business that is the size that we want to be, and we can have all the impact that we want to have, and we can nurture all of the things that we want to nurture within our communities, and we can take action upon the things that we want to take action upon. We can continue to build great product. We can continue to service our customers with that great product, and we can do all of that without growing, right? And that is I wouldn't say a solved challenge or a question, but it is something that the company is trying to understand, if and how we would do that.
I love that. And it's this whole thing, isn't it? It's like it's being aware of limits, having limits, knowing what. There's a nice thing I've seen at the moment about, I was talking about efficiency, but like, let's talk about sufficiency. Like, what is, how much is sufficient, and it's just this whole, this deeper question of like, what is enough, and when are we satisfied, and what limits are we going to put on things? And these are kind of things that just seem to have been, again, just sort of lost in commerce, particularly over the last, the few years. This idea of having limits almost seems absurd.
You're right, but what's really interesting, Dan, and we're absolutely seeing this, is the explosion of re-commerce, right? Especially with young people. Young people, they change their minds about the things that they like. They evolve as people, and clothing has always been a really powerful tool of self-expression. And the way that young people have been able to get access to that sort of changing of their image has been through fast fashion, relatively recently. But you can see that when another option like Depop is given to them, they'll absolutely go there. They'll absolutely, and not only that, is it's an environment where you can participate and benefit from. I'm done with this, I'm going to sell it, and somebody is definitely going to buy it. And that thing there that person's selling, I'm going to buy it. And do you know what? It's going to cost me less, and it's going to be twice, 3 times, 4 times the quality of the thing that I would have previously bought from H&M or Topshop. I think Topshop's gone now, isn't it? But whatever.
Yeah.
And this is real stuff that's happening, and it's pragmatically driven. And the fact that technology has enabled something like Depop and the various sort of peer-to-peer Second Life marketplaces to scale is a really, really brilliant thing. And these are young people who will become adults and bring that understanding of, something doesn't have to be new for me to want it. And the circularity of product and Second Life, Third Life, Fourth Life things. I think this is a genie that's out of the bottle. And what you're now seeing is brands racing to be in that game, to have their own Second Life platforms so they can resell their own jeans rather than they want a slice of the pie rather than being sold on Depop. So there's a lot of really just cool trend-based stuff that's happening that is addressing some of these things. Of course, it's not addressing the consumption that sits at the heart of that. It's just a different way of consuming.
Or the shareholder desire. I guess it's like our shareholders going to be happy with that model, which has limits, and I guess that's what we're all up against now, isn't it? Because talking about, you're right. My son some bloke just dropped off a pair of trainers an hour ago. Apparently they were cheap. They were secondhand. I'm not sure they were that cheap, but anyway. Move on. But yeah, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Are you getting a sense from that? I mean, you're obviously still a private business, but where do you think that dynamic of, because like you say, the future in the minds, if this generation will bring that into how they think about designing enterprise, then that's really hopeful. I guess it's just like, how does
designing enterprise and designing product, and and I can only speak for us in that. One of the things that warmwear enabled, so in order to do warmwear effectively, you need a lot of people to be able to repair gear and make it ready for reselling, or to repair it and give it back to those customers if it's a repair job, and the process of that gives you a deeper understanding of how to design product so that it doesn't fail in the same way that when you redesign it, or that you're designing for repairability. And design for repairability, I think, is a big change that is needed, right? Not designing for obsolescence, but designing for circularity and repairability. So, I think that's a change that is needed. But of course, if that change isn't compatible with sort of relentless, never-ending growth, which the publicly owned, publicly traded business model is, right? Yeah. If it's not compatible with that, then it will be challenging for sure. I mean, we have the benefit of being privately owned, so there aren't those same pressures, and maybe that is at least in part, why we're able to do some of the things that we're able to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so interesting. It's reminding me of because again, I guess that's what you're saying, like designing for repairability, and then obviously creating a system where you're able to create new things out of old products. Like you say, it's messy. You're having to sort of design a completely different type of system, I imagine, and we're probably moving from that sort of faster, more efficient way of producing products, and then you're sort of thinking you're trying to design a system which is actually, I guess, is more human scale in some ways, because potentially, but it's a completely different philosophy almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you think about, for example, if you reached a place where all of your customers, no matter where they were able to take the product that they own, that they bought from you, to somewhere close to them, maybe within their immediate vicinity, community, to be repaired and handed back to them, or that they could say, okay, I don't need this product anymore. I'm going to trade it back to you, Patagonia, or whoever else, and get some credit and benefit from that I might use to get something I actually do need or want from you. And that all of these things can happen close to the point of need. You're also putting these skills and services that, to your point, are very tactile, very human things. A machine, it's very difficult to program a machine to repair a tear in a jacket. Right? These things are very manual, they're very human. And this, again, comes back to this idea of local communities, this idea that, if we have a repair station in our store in Bristol, we currently don't, by the way, but that is absolutely an ambition, so that the community that, that's connected to the Patagonia brand in Bristol know that, there is a product technician in that store that can repair that jacket whenever they need it repaired. And that's putting employment into that community. It's keeping craft alive.
Yeah,
there are lots and lots of benefits to these, evolved business models.
Yeah, no, I love it. Thank you, Alex, for this time. I can see we could keep going, but we'll do another one down the line. Just anything folks could be looking out for, ways to get involved, things that people curious about the Patagonia mission. I can put all the show notes, but just any top of mind thoughts.
I would ask anyone that's listening to check out our very latest mini film campaign called Vjosa Forever, and we have a possibility, along with a network of groups that we're supporting, to permanently protect the river Vjosa in Albania, which runs from the mountains in northern Greece, actually just across the border from Albania, into Albania and down into the Adriatic Sea. It's over 300 kilometers long. It is pretty much the only fully intact wild river ecosystem in Europe, and one of the only few left in the world. And we have a chance of protecting it in perpetuity, and for it to attain the status of the first ever wild river national park. And so we are really pushing on a campaign at the moment that is doing a couple of things. There's an election coming up in Albania, and it's kind of putting some pressure into that election moment to try and get candidates to commit to the Vjosa River National Park, and also putting a little bit of pressure on Ursula von der Leyen and the crew at the EU to see this river as a European national treasure, and hopefully work with Albania to do that. It's a truly incredible place, and it's a place that's very much worth protecting, and it's right on our doorstep. So if you feel like getting active, hop into that campaign, and there's some things that you can do there.
Nice.
It's a beautiful little film as well. It's really nice.
I'll stick the links in for that, and obviously we'll stick in some links to action work. That's another folks want to get active. I'll just finish off with my little question, on the spaceship Earth, becoming crew on the spaceship Earth. Just curious to thinking about where we are right now, this time, 2021. What's that suggesting to you?
Yeah. I mean, we spoke about it earlier, Dan. I think, understanding what justice is at a global level and relearning my place in a truly equitable crew on spaceship Earth. I think that's this moment for me, and I think that will be, that'll be where a lot of my intention is focused over the coming months and years, I think.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alex. Really.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I loved it. It's always great chatting to you, Dan. It's brilliant.
I didn't ramble too much, did I? No?
I think I might have rambled more than you, to be honest.
It's good.
I don't know.
It's good. It's good to have a ramble. It's been a long week. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Alex. What a brilliant human he is, and what an extraordinary business organization Patagonia is. And do check out their work, campaigns and films. You can learn your way into so many of these really complex issues we're facing, and you can really get under the skin with Patagonia. They're really, I think, creating some beautiful ways for people to learn about what this system that we've built is doing now to our living world, and therefore ultimately to ourselves. So a lot to explore there. I definitely recommend watching Artificial, Public Trust, and the new campaign and film Alex mentioned, We the Power. But once you start digging into Patagonia, you'll be bowled over with just amazing content, films. They have a book division, amazing books they release. And there's so much we didn't get into. Like the big drive into sustainable food with Patagonia Provisions, their work with regenerative agriculture, their work with soils, and the extraordinary ways that they cultivate a company culture and a way of working. And again, there's the classic book, Let My People Go Surfing, The Responsible Business, but also their approach to things like company childcare. I mean, there's a book called The Family Business, and you think, what might happen if all businesses adopted this type of thinking? What kind of shift would be possible if we kind of joined hands on these ideas? It's all part of that really challenging mission of leading and practicing an examined life. It's uncomfortable, but is there any other way if we're to genuinely heal this world and shift to a life-sustaining way of organising ourselves on the spaceship Earth? So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. So if you are enjoying this podcast, if you enjoyed that podcast, do share it. Give us a rating or a review on Apple or whatever medium you listen on. It's always really helpful to get a little cheeky review. Go on, give us a review. Go on. And you can subscribe to the Spaceship Earth newsletter. Goes out once a month. And if you've got any questions or thoughts on anything, drop us a line, dan@spaceship.earth. I'm going to play out this episode with a track. This is a track from Max Cooper. It's called Perpetual Motion. It's from his Yearning for the Infinite album from 2019. It's got a beautiful vibe and a beautiful energy. Look after yourselves. Take good care of those around you and the more than human world which creates life for all of us. Until next time, peace and out.